Have you ever wondered why you crave fatty foods, even when you know they're bad for you? Or why we can be incredibly generous one moment and then fiercely competitive the next? Well, the answers might be way, way older than you think. Today, we're going to dive into evolutionary psychology, a super powerful way of understanding the ancient, deep-seated roots of our very modern behaviors.
And it all kind of kicks off with a puzzle, a real paradox about us. We build these huge, complex societies that are all based on trusting and cooperating with strangers. And yet, our history and even our daily lives are full of conflict, competition, and cunning. So how can we be both of these things at once? This is exactly the kind of knot that evolutionary psychology tries to untangle.
Okay, to get to the bottom of this, you got to understand that there are two totally different kinds of questions we can ask. Proximate questions are all about the how. For example, how does jealousy actually work? Well, it involves immediate things, right? Certain parts of your brain light up, you get a rush of hormones like adrenaline. That's the machinery of it. But evolutionary psychology asks the ultimate question, why? Why did we evolve the capacity for jealousy in the first place? What problem did it solve for our ancestors? And it's that why that we're going to be focused on today.
So to really get a grip on the why, we first have to do a super quick refresh on the basic tools that evolution uses to build, well, everything, including our own minds.
Modern evolutionary theory is basically this brilliant fusion of two gigantic ideas. On one hand, you've got Charles Darwin, who gave us the engine, natural selection. And on the other, you have Gregor Mendel and his famous pea plants, who gave us the fuel, genetics. See, Mendel showed that traits are passed down in these distinct little packets we now call genes. This was huge, because it meant that useful adaptations don't just get blended away and disappear. They can actually stick around and be passed on. And right at the heart of the whole thing is natural selection. The idea is so simple, but its power is just immense. I want you to imagine a sieve. In every generation, you have all this natural variation in traits. The environment acts as the sieve. It just filters out what doesn't work. So only the traits that help an organism survive and have babies get passed through to the next generation. Now repeat that process millions and millions of times, and this is the only process in nature that we know of that can create things of incredible complexity, like a human eye or the emotion of fear.
But, and this is a really important point, not all evolutionary change is about clever adaptation. There's also something called genetic drift, which is basically evolution by pure dumb luck. Imagine a bunch of beetles, some green and some brown, and a few just get randomly squashed. If, just by chance, more of the green ones got squashed, well, the next generation is going to have more brown beetles. Not because brown was a better color, but just because of a random accident. It's change, sure, but it's not purposeful design, and that's the huge difference between this and natural selection. Okay, so how does this whole toolkit apply to us, to our psychology? Well, this is where we get to the absolute core idea of evolutionary psychology. These same evolutionary forces didn't just shape our bodies. They didn't stop at the neck. They sculpted the very architecture of our minds. This quote right here just nails it. It's the whole idea in a nutshell. I mean, just think about it. In what is a blink of an eye in evolutionary time, we've gone from hunting on the savannah to living in skyscrapers, from telling stories around a campfire to scrolling through social media. Our world has changed at this insane breakneck speed, but our brains? Well, our brains haven't really caught up. We're running on software that was programmed for a hunter-gatherer world that's long gone.
Now, this ancient world is what researchers call the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, or the EEA. But here's a key insight I really want you to get. The EEA isn't some specific place or a particular year, like 50,000 BC. It's really the statistical average of all the survival problems that our ancestors faced over and over and over again. Problems like finding food, avoiding becoming food, choosing a good mate, and figuring out the social politics of a small group. So you can think of our minds as this incredible toolkit, with each mental tool specifically designed to solve one of those ancient recurring problems. Okay, so enough with the theory. How does this actually apply to our lives today? Let's take a look at one of the most studied areas in all of EP, the complex, sometimes thrilling, sometimes frustrating world of mate selection.
A foundational idea here is something called parental investment theory. And the logic behind it is actually pretty simple, but it has these profound consequences. For our species, the absolute bare minimum biological investment to produce a child is just vastly different for men and women. As you can see, for a woman, it's a 9-month pregnancy, childbirth, lactation. It's a huge investment. This one biological asymmetry creates a really powerful evolutionary pressure. The sex that invests more in their offspring, in this case females, becomes more selective, more choosy about their partners. And the sex that invests less tends to compete more for access to them.
So if you start from that core logic, you can make some pretty clear, testable predictions. The theory predicts that, on average, women will place a higher value on traits in a long-term partner that signal an ability to invest resources and protect. And this slide just lists a few of those cues. Things like status, resources, ambition, and of course, health. From an evolutionary perspective, these aren't just arbitrary cultural values. For our ancestors, they were reliable, life-and-death clues about who would be a good long-term provider.
All right, but survival wasn't only about finding a mate. It was about navigating a really complex social world. And this brings us right back to that social paradox we started with, our incredible capacity for both amazing cooperation and, at the same time, cunning deception. For our ancestors, working together as a team was a huge survival advantage. It was a game changer. But, and here's the catch, the moment you have a world full of trusting cooperators, you create the perfect opportunity for a cheating strategy to evolve. Someone who can get all the benefits of the group without paying any of the costs. This likely kicked off an evolutionary arms race right inside our own species, a constant pressure to get better at detecting cheaters, running side by side with a pressure to get better at deceiving others when it serves your own interests. Now, this way of thinking is really powerful, but let's be honest, it is not without its critics. So I think it's really important that we take a look at some of the most common challenges that get thrown at evolutionary psychology.
Okay, so a major criticism you'll hear is that these are all just so stories, convenient, untestable tales about the past. But the defense is that a good evolutionary hypothesis isn't actually about the past. It makes specific, testable predictions about how our minds are designed and how we behave today. Another huge one is the charge of genetic determinism, this idea that our genes are our destiny and we're just robots acting out a script. But the modern view isn't about being hardwired. It's about interaction. Our evolved psychology is designed to be incredibly flexible, responding to all sorts of cues from our culture and our personal environment.
And this leads us to what is maybe the most important ethical question of all. If we find an evolutionary root for some behavior, let's say something like aggression or infidelity, does that mean it's natural and therefore it's okay? And the answer is a hard no. This is such a critical distinction to make. To explain a behavior is not to excuse it. Saying we have an evolved tendency for something like tribalism or jealousy doesn't make it morally right, and it certainly doesn't make it unavoidable. In fact, you could argue the exact opposite is true. By understanding these deep-seated impulses, we gain the self-awareness we need to consciously choose when to act on them and, maybe more importantly, when to override them.
The classic view of EP can sometimes feel a bit, well, static, like all the important stuff happened way back in the Stone Age. But modern evolutionary science gives us a much more dynamic, exciting picture of how we're still evolving.
And this brings us to this really fascinating idea called gene-culture coevolution. It's a two-way street. We know our genes influence the kinds of cultures we build, but, and this is the amazing part, our cultural inventions, things like farming or laws or technology, can create entirely new selective pressures that actually turn around and shape the evolution of our genes.
The perfect example of this is lactose tolerance. As you can see on this timeline, originally, pretty much all adult humans were lactose intolerant. But then, some human groups invented dairy farming, a purely cultural innovation. This new practice created a powerful new selective pressure. In those populations, any individuals who happened to have a random mutation that let them digest milk as adults had a huge nutritional advantage, and that gene spread like wildfire. Think about that. A cultural practice literally reshaped our DNA.
So after this whirlwind tour, what's the big takeaway from all this? How should we really think about evolutionary psychology in our own lives?
At the end of the day, evolutionary psychology isn't some rigid set of laws that dictate who we are. It's a lens. It's a powerful tool that you can use to look at any part of your life, your relationships, your job, your anxieties, and ask a deeper question. Why is my mind designed to react this way? What ancient problem might this feeling be trying to solve? It's not going to give you all the answers, but it will absolutely lead you to asking better, more profound questions. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. The next time you're scrolling through social media or navigating office politics or even swiping on a dating app, just pause for a second. Try to look at your own reactions through this evolutionary lens. Ask yourself, which part of this very modern experience is being driven by my very ancient mind? The answers you find just might surprise you.